Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we have a story that is absolutely nuclear. What do you do when you spend your life clawing your way up from rock bottom, only to find out your own parents and golden child brother are plotting to rob you of your $32 million empire? Let's dive into our story today. My brother was always the golden child. Parents paid his rent. Now I have $32 million, and my perfect legal trap will leave him with nothing. Let's get into it. My name's Arthur. I'm 45, and for as long as I can remember, my family made it painfully clear who the chosen one was. Spoiler alert, it wasn't me. My older brother, Robert, was the undeniable golden child from the exact moment he took his first breath in this world. If he sneezed, my parents would rush over with tissues, hot soup, and a thermometer, acting like it was a national emergency. If I broke my arm falling off my bike when I was 10, I got a stern lecture about being careless, ruining my clothes, and how hospital bills don't magically pay themselves. That was the exhausting, inescapable rhythm of our household. Robert shined brightly in the center of the room, and I was fully expected to stay quietly in the shadows, making sure not to block his light. The favoritism wasn't subtle. It wasn't something you had to read between the lines to see. It was broadcasted daily. When Robert went off to a private university, my parents didn't just cover his exorbitant tuition. They paid his rent for a luxury downtown apartment, leased him a brand new sports car because he said walking to class made him tired, and gave him an allowance for groceries that somehow entirely transformed into designer clothes, weekend getaways, and VIP concert tickets. Meanwhile, I was the ghost in the house. I worked grueling night shifts at a local, run-down mechanic shop, coming home at dawn with grease permanently stained into my knuckles, just to afford the basic tuition at the community college across town. I didn't ask for much, but on the rare occasions I did ask for a little help, it was always met with the exact same dismissive speech. It was always some variation of, "Arthur, you need to learn personal responsibility. The real world doesn't hand out free rides." I learned it, all right. I learned it the hard way. Every scraped-together dollar, every freezing night shift under the hood of a broken-down sedan, every skipped meal just so I could afford my used textbooks. It all hardened me. It turned me into someone who expected nothing from anyone. But Robert floated through life on a cloud woven from my parents' bank accounts. When Robert turned 25, he racked up $50,000 in credit card debt after trying to live like a billionaire on social media and investing in an embarrassingly obvious pyramid scheme. My parents swooped in like desperate superheroes, drained their savings, and wrote a check to clear his name without a single word of reprimand. The message to me was crystal clear. Robert's catastrophic mistakes were forgivable acts of youthful exploration. My mistakes would have been undeniable proof that I was a permanent disappointment. By the time he turned 30, they helped him put a massive down payment on a sprawling suburban house, claiming he needed the space to settle down. When I turned 30, living in a cramped studio apartment with a leaky roof, my parents mailed me a generic, drugstore Christmas card with a crisp $50 bill tucked inside. The note, written in my mother's flawless cursive, read, "Don't spend it all at once." I still remember sitting on my hand-me-down mattress, holding that $50 bill, and laughing until my chest physically ached. The thing is, I had stopped expecting fairness or love a very long time ago. I learned to channel that deep, burning resentment into something else entirely. I channeled it into an absolute, relentless obsession with my work. But before I could truly rise, they had to break me down one last time. To really understand the sheer audacity of what my family did recently, you need to understand what happened 10 years ago. I was 35, pouring every waking hour into a small, independent machine shop I had managed to lease. I was transitioning from auto mechanic work to designing automated supply chain parts. It was dangerous, heavy work. One rainy Tuesday evening, a rigged hoist snapped. A massive steel engine block came crashing down, pinning my lower body to the concrete floor. The pain was a blinding, white-hot flash that knocked the breath out of my lungs. I woke up in a sterile hospital room with a shattered femur, severe spinal compression, and a doctor holding a clipboard that basically spelled out my financial ruin. I needed multiple surgeries, months of physical therapy, and I couldn't work. The medical bills were piling up faster than I could comprehend, and my shop, the only thing I had built with my own two hands, was weeks away from foreclosure because I couldn't pay the commercial lease. I was backed into a corner. I was absolutely terrified, so I swallowed the very last shred of my pride. I put on my brace, grabbed a pair of crutches, and dragged my broken body through the freezing rain to my parents' house. I didn't ask for a handout. I brought a meticulously drafted business plan and a repayment schedule. I begged them for a $15,000 loan, just enough to cover the shop's rent and keep the lights on while I recovered. I promised to pay them back with interest. I sat at their pristine kitchen table, shaking from the pain medication and the cold, laying out the documents. My father wouldn't even look me in the eye. My mother sighed heavily, looking at me like I was a stray dog tracking mud onto her white carpets. And then Robert walked into the room. He leaned against the counter, sipping a craft beer, and smirked. "Come on, Artie," Robert sneered, looking down his nose at me. 15 grand? We all know your little garage is a sinking ship. Mom, Dad, he's probably just in debt to some shady people or gambling it away. Don't throw good money after bad. He needs to learn how to manage a business properly. I tried to defend myself. I pointed to my cast, to the medical records, but the jury had already reached a verdict. My mother slid my paperwork back across the table, her face a mask of cold, unfeeling stone. "Robert is right, Arthur," she said, her voice completely devoid of a mother's warmth. "We can't just bail you out every time life gets difficult. You chose this risky path. You need to take responsibility for your own life. We don't have that kind of money to just throw around on a failing venture." I hobbled out of that house feeling like I had been stabbed in the chest. I nearly lost everything. I had to sell my only vehicle, a beat-up pickup truck, and take on a predatory high-interest loan just to keep the shop from being padlocked by the bank. I ate plain rice and beans for a year. But here is the detail that truly killed whatever love I had left for them. Exactly 1 week after I sat at that table begging for my livelihood, it was Robert's birthday. My parents threw him a massive barbecue. I didn't go, but I saw the pictures plastered all over social media. Sitting in their driveway, wrapped in a giant red bow, was Robert's birthday present from my parents. A brand new, customized recreational speedboat. The cost of that boat? Exactly $15,000. They didn't lack the money. They just lacked a single ounce of empathy for me. They watched me drowning, and instead of throwing me a life preserver, they bought my brother a luxury boat to ride over my head. That was the exact moment the family dynamic shifted in my mind. They were no longer my parents or my brother. They were just strangers who happened to share my DNA. From that day forward, I was truly alone, and that realization was the most liberating thing that ever happened to me. Man, seriously, do you guys feel your blood boiling right now? I'm genuinely pissed off for the OP. Just imagine, you get into a horrible accident, your femur is shattered, your business is about to go bankrupt. You drag yourself on crutches to your parents' house, papers in hand, and you literally beg them for a $15,000 loan just to save your shop. And what do? They shut you down cold. They humiliate you right to your face. Then, exactly 1 week later, they buy your brother a brand new $15,000 luxury speedboat, wrapped with a giant red bow. Are you kidding me? Alright, let's keep going with the OP's story. Rock bottom is a terrifying place, but it's also a phenomenal foundation to build upon. Once you realize nobody is coming to save you, you stop looking at the door and start looking at the tools in front of you. I took all that blinding rage, all the humiliation of begging for my life while they bought a boat, and I forged it into absolute, unbreakable discipline. I didn't just rebuild my machine shop. I pivoted. I taught myself advanced coding late at night, fueled by cheap, bitter coffee and the burning memory of Robert's smug face. I combined my mechanical knowledge with software engineering to create an automated logistics and supply chain system. For 15 years, I existed in a state of total, unapologetic obsession. I worked 100-hour weeks. I slept on a thin yoga mat under my office desk more times than I slept in my own bed. I sacrificed relationships, vacations, and free time. Every time I felt exhausted, every time I wanted to quit, I pictured that red bow on that stupid $15,000 boat. I built the company entirely from scratch, quietly scaling it in the shadows. I hired brilliant engineers, secured patents, and slowly took over a highly lucrative niche in the tech industry. Meanwhile, my parents continued their endless parade of bragging about Robert. Robert got a mid-level management job. They threw a party. Robert bought a new suit. They posted a 10-paragraph essay on Facebook about his incredible fashion sense. They never once called to ask what I was doing. They didn't know I had moved my headquarters to a massive commercial space. They didn't know I had 150 employees. They didn't know because they fundamentally didn't care. Then, last year, the finish line arrived. A massive, global tech conglomerate had been eyeing my proprietary software for months. The negotiations were intense, grueling, and secretive. When the final contract was pushed across the mahogany table in a high-rise law office, my hand didn't even shake as I signed it. The deal closed. The acquisition was final. The number? $32 million. When the wire transfer cleared and I saw that unbelievable, life-altering string of numbers populate in my private bank account, I didn't cheer. I didn't go out and buy a fleet of exotic sports cars or pop $1,000 bottles of champagne. I drove back to my modest apartment, took off my boots, grabbed a cold, cheap beer from the fridge, and sat in the dark. I stared at the wall, listening to the silence of the room. I had won. The war I had been fighting against poverty, against failure, against the crushing weight of my family's expectations. It was over. I was a multimillionaire. I had more money than my parents and Robert could even comprehend. But I decided not to tell a single soul in my family. I wanted a social experiment. I wanted to see how long it would take for them to reach out to me organically. I wanted to see if maybe, just maybe, they would call to check on their youngest son just for the sake of it. Months went by. Spring turned into summer. Summer faded into autumn. My phone remained entirely silent. Not a text, not a voicemail, not a passing thought. I bought a beautiful piece of land, invested heavily in diversified trusts, and set up a foundation for underprivileged teens to learn coding. I lived a rich, full life, entirely separated from their toxic orbit. And then came the inevitable invitation to the annual Christmas dinner. I almost didn't go, but a dark, curious part of me wanted to sit at that table one last time. I wanted to look them in the eyes, knowing what I knew, holding the power I held. I put on a simple, unmarked sweater, drove my old reliable sedan, and walked right into the lion's den, carrying a $32 million secret in my back pocket. Part 4. The fateful Christmas dinner. Expected word count, 750. The atmosphere in my parents' house that Christmas was exactly as suffocating as I remembered. The living room looked like it had been violently attacked by a holiday catalog. Pine garlands were draped over every conceivable surface. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon was thick in the air, and classic carols played softly from expensive wireless speakers. It was a picture-perfect American family setting, completely hollow on the inside. I took my usual seat at the far end of the long dining table, the spot designated for the afterthought. Robert, of course, held court at the center, seated to my father's right. He was wearing a custom-tailored shirt, and my eyes immediately caught the heavy, metallic gleam on his left wrist. A brand-new Rolex Submariner. No doubt another little reward quietly funded by the bank of Mom and Dad. The entire first hour of dinner was dedicated to the Gospel of Robert. I sat quietly, passing the mashed potatoes and pouring wine, listening to a grown man pushing 50 wine like a spoiled teenager. He complained endlessly about how his boss didn't appreciate his vision, how the taxes on his suburban property were absolute extortion, and how incredibly stressful it was to manage a team of 5 people. It's just exhausting, you know? Robert sighed, taking a large gulp of my father's expensive scotch. People just expect so much from me. Sometimes I feel like I'm carrying the entire weight of the corporate world on my shoulders. My mother cooed sympathetically, reaching over to pat his hand. We know how hard you work, sweetie. You're so dedicated. They really don't deserve you at that company. The sheer irony of his complaints almost made me choke on my dinner roll. I took a slow sip of water, keeping my face entirely neutral. I was an observer in a bizarre play. Then, out of nowhere, the script changed. Sitting across from me was my Aunt Helen. Helen was my father's sister, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had always seen right through my mother's theatrics. She was the only person in the extended family who had ever treated me like a human being, occasionally sending me a $20 bill during my college days. During a brief lull in Robert's complaining, Aunt Helen turned her sharp gaze down the table toward me. "So, Arthur," she said, her voice clear and carrying over the holiday music, "you've been awfully quiet down there. How are things with you? Last time we spoke, years ago, you were pouring your soul into some kind of tech and logistics project. How did that little venture pan out?" The table went dead silent. The sudden shift in attention away from Robert was almost physically jarring to my parents. My father frowned, annoyed at the interruption. My mother looked at Helen like she had just sworn in a church. Robert tilted his head, flashing a condescending, greasy smirk. "Yeah, Artie, how's the little garage shop doing? Still playing with car parts and computers?" I looked at Robert, then I looked at my mother and finally at my father. I set my fork down on my plate. The clink of the metal against the porcelain sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. I leaned back in my chair, interlaced my fingers, and took a slow, deliberate breath. "Actually, Aunt Helen, the venture panned out incredibly well," I said, my voice completely calm, devoid of any bragging or emotion. It was a simple statement of fact. "I sold the company last year." My father scoffed, taking another sip of his scotch. "Sold it? For what? Enough to buy a used Honda?" I held my father's gaze unblinking. "No, Dad. It was a full corporate acquisition by a major tech firm. I sold it for $32 million. The air was instantly vacuumed out of the dining room. It was as if someone had hit a mute button on the universe. A fork literally slipped from my mother's hand and clattered loudly onto her plate, spraying a bit of gravy onto the white tablecloth. Aunt Helen's eyes went wide, a genuine, delighted smile spreading across her face. But the rest of my family? They looked like they had just watched a ghost walk through the wall. The silence stretched on for 5, 10, 15 agonizing seconds. The Rolex on Robert's wrist seemed to tick louder. I just sat there, perfectly still, watching the reality of my words slowly, painfully sink into their brains. The ghost had just bought the mansion, and they had absolutely no idea how to process it. Robert's face was a fascinating study in rapid psychological decay. First, all the blood drained from his cheeks, leaving him a sickly, chalky white. Then, a deep, furious red crept up his neck, mottling his skin. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for oxygen on a dry dock. 32. "What?" Robert stammered, his voice cracking, entirely stripped of its usual arrogant bass. "Million," I repeated, enunciating the word clearly. $32 million. It's sitting in private trusts and diversified accounts right now. That was the breaking point. It was like dropping a live grenade into the center of the holiday ham. Robert pushed his heavy oak dining chair back so violently that it tipped over and crashed onto the hardwood floor. He stood up, his hands visibly trembling, his chest heaving under his tailored shirt. And then, a 48-year-old man completely lost his grip on reality. He didn't just yell. He collapsed. Robert's knees buckled, and he dropped onto the floor, curling his hands into the expensive rug, and began sobbing. It wasn't a dignified, quiet cry. It was full-on, chest-heaving, snot-bubbling weeping. He looked exactly like a toddler who had been told Christmas was canceled forever. "That's not fair," Robert wailed from the floor, pounding his fist against the wood. "That's not fair. You can't have that kind of money. It's impossible. You're just Arthur. You fix cars." My mother rushed to him, dropping to her knees, frantically petting his hair as if he had just been physically assaulted. "Shoo, Robbie, it's okay. Breathe," she cooed. casting a venomous glare up at me. Robert scrambled to his feet, pushing my mother aside. His face was soaked with tears, his eyes wild and completely unhinged. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger directly at my face. "You owe me!" he screamed, spit flying from his lips. "I carried this family's reputation. I did everything right. I went to the right school. I deserve that money. You need to give me at least $18 million right now. I deserve it more than you." I sat frozen, not out of fear, but out of sheer, unadulterated awe at the absolute delusion unfolding in front of me. I actually thought I had misheard him. 18 million? He was seriously demanding the lion's share of the money I bled for, simply because he existed? Before I could even formulate a response to that sheer insanity, my mother slammed both of her hands onto the dining table. The crystal wine glasses rattled violently. She stood up, leaning over the food, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. It was a look she had never given Robert, a look reserved exclusively for me. "You stole his future," she screamed, her voice shrill and echoing off the walls. "You robbed your brother of what should have been his. You deliberately hid this from us. You sat there hoarding millions while your brother stressed over his mortgage? How dare you? You planned this just to make him look bad." I looked at my father. He was staring into his scotch glass, completely silent, cowardly avoiding my eyes, just as he had done 10 years ago. I didn't yell. I didn't raise my voice. I slowly stood up, pushing my chair in neatly. I looked my mother dead in the eyes, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Stole his future?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "Was it fair when you paid off his $50,000 credit card debt while I was eating ramen out of a styrofoam cup? Was it fair when you bought him a $15,000 speedboat for his birthday, in the exact same week you told me to take responsibility, while I lay in a hospital bed facing bankruptcy?" My mother flinched, opening her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. "You've done everything for him," I said, looking down at Robert, who was still weeping. "And you did absolutely nothing for me. You didn't build this company. You didn't lose sleep over it. You don't own me, and you certainly don't own a single cent of my money." I turned my back on them, grabbed my winter coat from the hallway hook, and walked out the front door. As I stepped out into the freezing, swirling snow of the December night, I heard my mother screaming my name, but I didn't look back. The war had officially begun. "Wow, I'm here, not the OP. This scene is so intense. Arthur doesn't even need to raise his voice to be terrifying. It's his calm demeanor and those ice-cold words that send chills down your spine. This is exactly what everyone was hoping for. After years of being treated unfairly, the moment he stands up and speaks the truth is one of the most thrilling and satisfying moments in the entire story so far. Is anyone else like me? It's so satisfying watching Robert's and OP's moms' faces twist in shock. Let's keep going and see how this battle unfolds. I didn't sleep at all that night. I lay on the couch in my apartment, staring up at the dark ceiling, the adrenaline still pulsing violently through my veins. The image of a grown, 48-year-old man thrashing on the floor, demanding $18 million like it was a God-given birthright, played on an endless, looping reel in my mind. Any normal family would have been shocked, sure, maybe a little jealous, but eventually they would have been proud. My family? They immediately treated my success as a personal attack, a criminal act of theft against their precious golden boy. I thought, perhaps naively, that the morning light might bring them some shame. I thought they would wake up, realize the absolute absurdity of their behavior, and feel embarrassed. I was dead wrong. 2 days later, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I let it ring 3 times before I hit accept. I didn't say hello. "Have you thought about what we said?" my mother demanded. No greeting. No asking if I got home safe in the snow. Just a cold, hard business transaction. "About what?" I replied, feigning ignorance just to hear her say it out loud. "Don't play dumb with me, Arthur," she snapped, her tone dripping with toxic authority. Your brother is in pieces. He hasn't slept in 2 days. He had to take time off work because he's so traumatized by your betrayal. We have always taught you that family comes first. Your brother has carried the social weight of this family for decades. Give him the 18 million so he can feel secure, or you will deeply regret turning your back on your own blood. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter so tightly my knuckles turned white. Let me get this perfectly straight, I said, my voice eerily calm. You are giving me an ultimatum to hand over $18 million. Money I bled for, money I spent 15 years building, just because Robert threw a temper tantrum? You're being greedy and selfish, she shrieked into the receiver. It's just money. You don't even know what to do with it. If you don't do the right thing, you will suffer the consequences, Arthur. Do not ever call this number again, I said, and firmly pressed end. That was the match that lit the powder keg. By the next afternoon, the smear campaign had launched with military precision. My mother and Robert immediately went to work, calling every aunt, uncle, cousin, and family friend in our directory. They didn't tell the truth, of course. They spun a masterful, completely fabricated narrative. To hear them tell it, I was a sociopathic, heartless billionaire miser. They told everyone that Robert was on the verge of losing his home. A lie? He lived in a massive house they helped pay for. That his children were going to suffer? A lie? They went to private school. And that I sat at Christmas dinner, flaunting my wealth and laughing in Robert's face while refusing to lend him a few dollars to survive. My phone exploded. I started getting aggressive, guilt-tripping text messages from cousins I hadn't spoken to in 15 years. Hey Artie, heard about your payday. Pretty disgusting how you're treating your brother. Money changes people, I guess. Arthur, your mom is crying her eyes out. Be a man and help your family. You can't take it to the grave. They were poisoning the well, attempting to socially isolate me, to pressure me into caving through sheer public humiliation. They thought the threat of being the family villain would break me. But they fundamentally misunderstood who I was. I had been the villain in their story since I was born. I was completely immune to their guilt. I didn't respond to a single message. I just watched the texts roll in, feeling a profound, icy disgust. But I had no idea that their social manipulation was merely a distraction for a much, much darker plan. Exactly 1 week after the disastrous Christmas dinner, my life shifted from a bizarre family drama into a terrifying legal thriller. I was sitting at my home office desk, sipping black coffee, reviewing some architectural plans for the youth tech center I was funding, when my phone rang. It wasn't a family member. It was a restricted, highly secure number. I picked it up. Mr. Arthur? This is David Vance, Senior Vice President of Fraud Operations at your private wealth management firm. The voice said, tight and professional. We have a critical security situation. I need you to verify your identity immediately. My stomach dropped into my shoes. I went through the rigorous verbal passcode protocols. Once cleared, David took a heavy breath. Mr. Arthur, at approximately 3:14 a.m. this morning, someone attempted a massive, unauthorized breach of your primary holding accounts, David explained, his words echoing in the quiet room. This wasn't a standard overseas phishing attempt. This was highly targeted and intimately personal. What do you mean, personal? I asked, feeling a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. The perpetrators possessed your old social security number, David continued. But more alarmingly, they successfully bypassed our Tier 1 security gateway by answering your core, personalized security questions perfectly. They knew the exact name of your first childhood pet, the specific street you lived on in 2nd grade, and your mother's maternal grandmother's maiden name. I stopped breathing. My mind raced. No hacker on the dark web knows the name of the golden retriever we had when I was 6. No identity thief knows the obscure maiden name of my great-grandmother. There were only 2 people on the entire planet who possessed that exact combination of historical, intimate knowledge. My parents. Did they get anything? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, the horror of the realization paralyzing my vocal cords. No, sir, David assured me quickly. When they attempted to establish a recurring, permanent wire transfer of $2 million a month to an external account routing to a Robert. Our Tier 2 enterprise AI flagged the IP address mismatch and the velocity of the request. The system immediately locked the entire portfolio down. Your funds are completely safe. But Mr. Arthur, the IP address of the login attempt traces back to a residential broadband network in your hometown. Do you want us to involve federal authorities? I sat in my chair, staring blindly at my computer screen. This wasn't just a dispute over a dinner table anymore. This wasn't just my mother yelling at me or my brother crying about fairness. My own flesh and blood, the people who brought me into this world, had sat in the dark of the night, typed in my social security number, and actively tried to electronically rob me of my life's work. They were trying to drain me dry to fund Robert's pathetic, entitled existence. This was a felony. This was a massive, undeniable federal crime. Don't call the FBI yet, David, I said, my voice suddenly turning to cold, hard steel. Lock down everything. Issue new credentials. I want a full, forensic IP trace report and the timestamped digital logs sent to my secure server within the hour. Understood, sir, David replied. I hung up the phone. The silence in the house was deafening. The last shred of familial obligation, the last tiny, pathetic ember of hope I had that they were just misguided, was extinguished forever. They hadn't just crossed a line. They had obliterated it with a bulldozer. They thought I was the same broken, desperate 35-year-old man begging for a loan. They thought I would be a soft, easy target. They were about to find out that the man they created by leaving him in the dark had learned exactly how to hunt in it. The blinding rage I felt after hanging up with the bank wasn't the kind that makes you scream or throw things. It was a cold, hyper-focused fury that sharpens every single one of your senses. I didn't wait for the morning. I grabbed my keys, got into my car, and drove straight to my parents' house. The tires of my sedan crunched aggressively against the packed snow of their suburban driveway. But as I pulled up, my eyes locked onto something that made my blood run absolute zero. Parked right in the center of the driveway, gleaming under the harsh glow of the street lamp, was a brand new, midnight black Ford F-250 Platinum pickup truck. It still had the temporary dealer tags on it. This wasn't a standard work vehicle. This was a luxury status symbol on heavy-duty wheels, easily carrying a price tag of $90,000. As I stepped out of my car, the front door of the house opened. Robert walked out, wearing a thick designer parka, jingling a heavy set of keys in his hand. He stopped on the front porch, looked at me, and then looked at the massive truck. The sheer, unadulterated smugness that radiated from his face in that moment is an image permanently burned into my retinas. Nice ride, isn't it? Robert said, his voice dripping with arrogance as he walked down the steps, patting the hood of the truck like he had actually earned it. Leather interior, panoramic sunroof, the works. Figured I deserved an upgrade. I stared at him, my breath pluming in the freezing air. How exactly did you pay for a $90,000 truck, Robert? You were crying on the floor about your mortgage just last week. Robert leaned against the massive grille of the Ford, crossing his arms, flashing a grin that made me want to put my fist straight through his teeth. Family takes care of each other, Artie. Mom and Dad knew you'd eventually come around and stop acting like a selfish prick, so they went ahead and gave me a little advance. They pulled from their retirement savings to cover it in cash. They know you're good for it. The ground felt like it was shifting beneath my boots. An advance. They had raided their own retirement funds to buy him a luxury truck, fully believing they were about to successfully hack my bank accounts to reimburse themselves. The entitlement was so astronomically high it bordered on psychosis. I ignored Robert and shoved past him, storming right through the front door of the house. My mother was sitting in the living room, reading a magazine by the fireplace as if she hadn't just committed a federal crime hours earlier. She looked up, startled by my sudden entrance. Did you really think you could just hack into my private bank accounts? I demanded, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. You used my social security number. You used my childhood security questions to try and steal millions of dollars from me. Do you have any idea what you've done? My mother didn't gasp. She didn't deny it. She didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. She slowly closed her magazine, set it on the coffee table, and looked at me with an expression of cold, righteous defiance. "Don't you dare raise your voice in my house, Arthur," she commanded, her tone sharp and unyielding. "We were just making sure things were allocated fairly. You clearly have no moral compass, so your father and I had to step in. Robert is family. If you won't do the right thing and share your wealth, then we will do it for you." "That is wire fraud and identity theft," I yelled, the sheer disbelief cracking my stoic facade. "That is a federal felony. You could go to federal prison." My mother actually scoffed. "Oh, please, you wouldn't put your own mother in jail over a little family restructuring. Besides, who would ever believe you? You're just a bitter, jealous mechanic who got lucky. Now get out of my house before I call the police." Hold on a second. This scene is really heavy. Guys, OP is truly deeply hurt. What would you do if your own mother threw you out like a piece of trash? Would you choose to cut off the entire relationship? Or would you try to empathize with their feelings because no matter what, she's still your mother? Drop your opinions in the comments, and let's continue together. For the next 4 days, I completely isolated myself. I didn't go to my office, I didn't answer emails from my investment partners, and I certainly didn't answer my phone, which continued to light up with vile texts from manipulated relatives. I locked the doors of my apartment, closed the blinds, and sat in the quiet dark. I'm a 45-year-old man who has seen his fair share of hardship. I've had my body crushed by an engine block. I've faced the terrifying abyss of bankruptcy, and I've eaten out of garbage cans in my darkest hours. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepares a man for the profound, suffocating realization that his own parents view him merely as an ATM to be violently cracked open. It was a very specific type of grief. I was mourning people who were still alive. I was mourning the phantom idea of a mother and father that I never actually had. I remember sitting at my kitchen island at 2 in the morning, staring at a faint, jagged scar on my forearm from my mechanic days. I traced it with my finger. I had earned that scar. I had earned my $32 million, and they thought they could just take it. On the 5th day, the crushing weight of the depression lifted, rapidly replaced by a hyper-rational, icy state of calculation. I didn't want to cry anymore. I didn't want to yell. I wanted to dismantle their entire world, piece by piece, using the very legal and financial systems they thought they could outsmart. I opened my laptop and made 2 phone calls. The first call was to my corporate attorney, a woman named Sarah. In the tech logistics world, Sarah was known simply as the Shark. She was 50 years old, possessed a brilliant, ruthless legal mind, and drank her coffee black. When I explained the situation, the Christmas dinner, the hacking attempt, the confession, and the smear campaign, she didn't offer me emotional sympathy. She offered me a battlefield strategy. "Arthur," Sarah said, her voice crackling over the phone with absolute authority, "family disputes are messy because people let emotions steer the ship. We are not going to do that. We are going to build an impenetrable fortress around your assets, and then we are going to drop a legal anvil on their heads. They want to play the victim? We are going to give them a sworn deposition." The second call was to a private investigator Sarah highly recommended. His name was Marcus, an ex-federal financial fraud examiner who specialized in following digital paper trails. I didn't need him to follow my brother's car or take photos through windows. I needed him to definitively, legally prove exactly what my parents and brother had done, securing evidence that would hold up under the brutal scrutiny of a civil courtroom. I gave Marcus the contact information for my bank's fraud department, the VIN number of Robert's new Ford F-250 that I had memorized in the driveway, and a blank check. "Find everything," I told him. "Leave no stone unturned." The grief was gone. In its place was a machine, meticulously engineered to protect what was mine and to ensure that the golden child and his enablers faced the absolute, devastating consequences of their own unbridled greed. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in aggressive wealth protection and forensic investigation. I spent hours sitting in Sarah's sleek, glass-walled conference room, signing stacks of legal documents. First, we locked the vault. Under Sarah's direction, I moved my entire $32 million portfolio out of standard private wealth accounts and into a complex, multi-layered architecture of irrevocable trusts and holding companies located in highly secure jurisdictions. I legally removed myself as the direct owner of the capital, assigning it to corporate entities that I managed. Even if my parents somehow hired a miraculous lawyer, they couldn't sue me for money I technically didn't own on paper. The fortress was sealed. Next came the paper trail. I hired a forensic accountant to go through 30 years of my parents' financial history, which was remarkably easy given they had stupidly linked me to one of their minor checking accounts when I was 18 and never removed my name. The accountant created a massive, comprehensive Excel spreadsheet. It documented every single handout, bailout, and gift they had ever given Robert. The $50,000 credit card debt, the down payment on his house, the $15,000 speedboat, the lease payments on his cars. It amounted to over $400,000 in undocumented gifts over 20 years. It was the ultimate, undeniable proof of their extreme favoritism, ready to be weaponized against their narrative that Robert was a hard-working victim. But the real killing blow came from Marcus, the private investigator. Marcus walked into Sarah's office 2 weeks later, dropping a thick, manila folder onto the conference table with a heavy thud. He didn't smile. He just opened the file. "They are incredibly sloppy, Arthur," Marcus said, pulling out a stack of documents. "First, I liaised with your bank's cybersecurity team. We obtained the subpoena-ready digital logs of the hacking attempt. The IP address definitively traces back to the router installed at your parents' residential address. Furthermore, the device used to input your social security number was a desktop computer registered in your father's name." Marcus pulled out a second document. It was a copy of a dealership invoice. "This is the Holy Grail," he continued, pointing a pen at the highlighted numbers. "I tracked the sale of the Ford F-250 Platinum. It was purchased for $92,500. It was paid for in full via a cashier's check drawn directly from your parents' joint retirement savings account. The timestamp on the cashier's check is exactly 14 hours after they attempted to breach your bank accounts. They literally spent the money assuming they had already stolen yours to replace it." I looked at the documents. It wasn't just evidence. It was a perfectly crafted noose. They had executed a premeditated plan to rob me, and they had left a digital and paper trail a mile wide. "So, what's the next move?" I asked, looking at Sarah. "Do we call the police?" Sarah leaned back in her leather chair, a dangerous, calculating glint in her eye. "No. If we go to the police, the state takes over. It becomes a slow, quiet criminal matter, and your brother gets to play the tragic figure whose parents made a mistake. We aren't doing that. We are going to file a massive civil lawsuit against all three of them for attempted fraud, misappropriation of identity, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We are going to drag them into a mediation room, and we are going to legally strip them of their dignity. But before the lawsuit hit, I had one final, personal piece of business to handle. I needed to destroy the smear campaign Robert had built. I was going to fight their lies, not with shouting, but with blinding, undeniable truth. OP has truly undergone a complete transformation. He's no longer sitting around complaining. He turned all that pain into action. The way he matured was incredibly painful. From a boy who still clung to a faint hope, he has become a cold, decisive man. Honestly, if it were me, I don't know if I could stay calm enough to do what he did. What about you guys? Has anyone ever felt like they lost their family in this way? Drop your stories in the comments and tell me. For weeks, Robert and my mother had been playing the victims, calling every relative and family friend to paint me as a greedy, sociopathic billionaire who had abandoned his struggling family. My reputation among the extended family was in tatters. But I knew something they didn't. Fighting rumors with defensive arguments only makes you look guilty. The only way to kill a lie is to overwhelm it with a massive, unassailable truth. I reached out to a contact at a prominent regional business and lifestyle magazine. They had been begging me for an exclusive profile ever since the news of my $32 million acquisition leaked in corporate circles. I finally agreed to sit down with their senior editor. I didn't use the interview to bash my family. In fact, I barely mentioned them. Instead, I told the absolute unfiltered truth about my journey. I talked about working the night shifts at the auto shop with grease under my fingernails. I talked about the devastating accident that crushed my legs, the terror of facing bankruptcy, and the agonizing physical therapy I endured alone. I detailed how I built my software company from a cramped apartment, surviving on canned soup and sheer willpower. Then I revealed what I was doing with the money. I announced a $5 million endowment to create a series of vocational training centers for at-risk youth, focusing on mechanics and coding. I wanted to give kids the safety net I never had. When the magazine issue dropped, it featured a high-quality portrait of me on the cover, standing in my old machine shop. The headline read, "From crushed in a garage to a $32 million tech empire. The silent grit of Arthur." The article went viral within our community and among the extended family. It was a devastating, silent nuclear bomb dropped directly onto Robert's smear campaign. People read about my hospital stay, my near bankruptcy, and my massive philanthropic donations. The narrative shifted violently overnight. How could Arthur be a greedy monster if he was donating millions to orphans? How could Robert be the victim when Arthur had to rebuild his own shattered legs while working 100-hour weeks? The text messages from relatives changed immediately. Apologies flooded in. People started questioning Robert. Why didn't you tell us Arthur was in a wheelchair 10 years ago? Why are you driving a $90,000 truck if you're struggling to pay your mortgage? Robert's carefully constructed house of cards was collapsing in the wind. While the social fallout was happening, Sarah set the legal trap. She sent a formal, aggressive cease and desist letter via certified mail to my parents and Robert. It demanded that they immediately cease all attempts to access my financial information and stop spreading defamatory statements. It was a brilliantly calculated piece of bait. Sarah knew my mother's arrogance wouldn't allow her to simply ignore a legal threat from the son she despised. Exactly as Sarah predicted, my parents took the bait. Infuriated by the letter and the humiliating magazine article, they hired a sleazy, aggressive local attorney to fire back. Their lawyer sent us a laughable response, threatening to sue me for defamation and demanding an immediate cash settlement for family emotional damages. They thought they were showing strength. They thought they were intimidating me. But by hiring a lawyer and officially engaging in a legal dispute, they had unknowingly walked right into the kill box. Sarah smiled as she read their lawyer's response. "Perfect," she said, tossing the letter onto her desk. "They've officially lawyered up and made demands. The trap is set. Arthur, it's time to drop the hammer." The next morning, Sarah marched into the county courthouse and officially filed our civil complaint. It wasn't a quiet, minor filing. It was a comprehensive, devastating legal document that accused my parents and Robert of conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted grand larceny, identity theft, and severe financial harassment. When the process server handed my parents and Robert those thick stacks of legal papers, the reality of the situation finally breached their bubble of delusion. This wasn't a family argument they could win by screaming the loudest. This was the terrifying machinery of the American legal system coming to grind them into dust. Less than 48 hours after the papers were served, Sarah's office phone rang. It was the opposing counsel, the lawyer my parents had hired. I was sitting in Sarah's office, and she put him on speakerphone. The man's tone had completely lost its previous arrogance. He sounded nervous, almost placating. "Look, Sarah," the lawyer started, clearing his throat. "I've spoken extensively with my clients. They are extremely distressed. This is a family matter that has clearly gotten out of hand due to high emotions. Suing his own parents? Arthur must understand the catastrophic, permanent damage this will do to the family unit. We'd like to sit down and discuss a quiet, mutual withdrawal of all claims before this gets ugly." It was the classic playbook. When bullies realize they are outgunned, they suddenly want to preach about peace and family unity. Sarah leaned toward the speakerphone, her voice as cold and sharp as a scalpel. "Counselor, there is no mutual withdrawal. Your clients attempted to electronically steal millions of dollars from my client. We have the digital logs. We have the receipts. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is an attempted felony. We are not withdrawing anything." There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. "What do you want, then?" "A trial will ruin everyone's reputation. We will agree to a formal, binding mediation," Sarah replied flawlessly. "One session. You bring your clients, I will bring mine. If they do not agree to our exact terms in that room, I will immediately forward our complete evidence binder to the federal prosecutor's office for criminal fraud charges. Are we clear?" The opposing lawyer swallowed hard. The threat of federal prison for 2 retirees was the ultimate leverage. "We will be there," he conceded quietly. Sarah hung up the phone and looked at me. "They are terrified, Arthur. But Robert will still try to play the victim. Your parents will try to manipulate you when you are in the same room. You need to be a wall of stone." "Don't worry about me," I said, adjusting the cuffs of my suit. "The son they used to manipulate died 10 years ago. I'm just here to read the will." The date was set. The venue was a sterile, highly secure conference room in a neutral downtown arbitration building. It was time to pull back the curtain and force the golden child to look at his own pathetic reflection. The mediation room smelled faintly of ozone and expensive floor wax. I sat on one side of a massive, polished mahogany table with Sarah. Across from us sat my father, my mother, and Robert, flanked by their visibly sweating attorney. A neutral, retired judge sat at the head of the table as the mediator. My family looked terrible. My father had aged 10 years in 3 weeks, his eyes darting nervously around the room. My mother's usual immaculate posture was rigid with brittle terror. And Robert looked like a cornered rat. He kept crossing and uncrossing his arms, refusing to make eye contact with me. The opposing counsel opened the session with a predictable, desperate plea. "Your Honor, this is a tragic breakdown of family communication. My clients admit that emotions ran high after Arthur's sudden revelation of wealth, and perhaps some boundaries were blurred. But this lawsuit is a massive overreaction. We are asking Arthur to drop the suit in the spirit of family reconciliation, and perhaps offer a small, voluntary financial gift to help his brother through a tough time." I didn't say a word. I just looked at Sarah. Sarah didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply opened her sleek leather briefcase, pulled out 3 thick, bound folders, and slid them across the heavy wooden table. One for the mediator, one for the opposing counsel, and one placed directly in front of my parents. "Let's dispense with the fiction of blurred boundaries," Sarah said smoothly, her voice commanding the entire room. "Tab 1 contains the subpoenaed forensic IP logs from Arthur's private bank. It definitively proves that the unauthorized login attempt originated from the Wi-Fi router at your client's home address. Tab 2 contains the device registration, proving the computer used belongs to the father." My father's face drained of all color. He stared at the pages like they were covered in poison. "Tab 3, Sarah continued relentlessly, is a cashier's check receipt from the local Ford dealership, proving that less than 14 hours after attempting to steal my client's money, your clients withdrew $92,000 from their own retirement account to purchase a luxury truck for Robert. They committed attempted fraud to fund a lavish lifestyle for an able-bodied adult." The opposing counsel frantically flipped through the binder, his face flushing deep red. He leaned over and whispered furiously to my parents. He clearly hadn't been told the full truth about the IP logs. Robert suddenly slammed his hands on the table, unable to control his fragile ego. "He has $32 million, Robert shrieked, his voice echoing in the sterile room, pointing a shaking finger at me. "I didn't do anything wrong. I'm the one who did everything right. I gave you grandchildren. I carried the family name. I deserve a piece of that money. I deserve it." "You deserve nothing," Sarah barked back, slamming her hand flat on the table, instantly silencing him. She pointed directly at Robert. "Tab 4. It's the digital footprint showing that your mobile phone was connected to that exact Wi-Fi network at 3:14 a.m. during the hacking attempt. You were in the room, Robert. You are an accessory to attempted wire fraud. Robert's mouth snapped shut. His eyes widened in absolute, paralyzing horror as he realized his own digital trail had doomed him. He literally shrank down into his leather chair. My mother, realizing the walls were closing in, completely broke down. The arrogant matriarch vanished, replaced by a sobbing, desperate woman. "Arthur, please," she wept, reaching her hands out across the table toward me. "We're your parents. We gave you life. We were just trying to help your brother. Please don't send us to prison. We'll do anything. Please." I looked at her tears. 10 years ago, those tears might have moved me, but all I saw was the red bow on a $15,000 speedboat. "You didn't care if I lost everything, Mom," I said, my voice eerily calm and devoid of any pity. "You only care now because you got caught. I don't want to send you to prison, but you are going to pay for what you've done." I nodded to Sarah. It was time for the final terms. Sarah pulled out a final, single sheet of paper and slid it toward their attorney. "These are our non-negotiable terms," Sarah stated, her tone absolute. 1. Your clients will sign a sworn, legally binding admission of guilt regarding the unauthorized access of Arthur's accounts. 2. They will reimburse Arthur for every single cent of his legal and investigative fees, totaling $45,000, payable immediately. 3. They will sign a permanent, irrevocable restraining order, legally barring them from contacting Arthur, his businesses, or his financial institutions ever again. If they violate this order, or if they refuse to sign right now, we walk out that door and hand the evidence binder to the FBI. The room was dead silent. The mediator looked at the opposing counsel and simply nodded. There was no defense. It was total, unconditional surrender. My father's hands shook violently as he took the pen from his lawyer. He signed his name without reading the document. My mother signed next, tears staining the heavy paper, refusing to look at me. Finally, the paper was slid over to Robert. The golden boy hesitated. He looked at the paper that officially stripped him of his victimhood, his entitlement, and his pride. With a trembling, defeated hand, he scrawled his signature. As Sarah gathered the documents, sealing their fate, my mother looked up at me. Her eyes were red, filled with a toxic mixture of shame and venom. "You've destroyed this family, Arthur," she hissed, her voice trembling. "I hope your money keeps you warm at night." I stood up, buttoning my suit jacket. I looked down at the three of them, broken and pathetic in their expensive clothes. "No, Mom," I said, my voice ringing with absolute, unshakable clarity. "You destroyed this family when you chose greed over your own son. I just stopped letting you take me down with you." I turned around and walked out of the mediation room. I didn't look back. The aftermath was swift and brutal. To pay my legal fees and replenish his parents' decimated retirement accounts, Robert was forced to immediately sell his precious $90,000 Ford truck at a massive depreciation loss. The community and our extended family, having read the magazine article and caught wind of the humiliating legal settlement, completely alienated them. The golden glow around Robert was permanently extinguished, replaced by the shameful reality of a middle-aged man who tried to rob his own brother. As for me, I walked out of that arbitration building and into the cold, crisp winter air. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sensation of absolute freedom. I got into my car and drove back to the life I had built with my own two hands. I continued to grow my investments. I watched the youth centers flourish, and I built a new family of friends and colleagues who respected my character, not my bank account. I learned the hardest, most valuable lesson a man can ever learn. Family isn't determined by blood or a shared last name. True family is determined by mutual respect, loyalty, and love. And if the people who share your blood decide to treat you like a target, you owe them nothing but the door. I survived the shadows, I built my empire in the dark, and now, I finally get to live entirely in the light. Amazing. Seriously amazing. And that final reconciliation scene in the courtroom, where the golden child was forced to sign the permanent no-contact agreement while the mother was crying, We're your parents? That's karma. You guys agree with me, right? Now let's go through some comments I know you're all thinking. Reddit user Lucas87. Not wrong at all. The parents created this monster by spoiling Robert rotten and treating Arthur like the unwanted child. The hacking plot went way too far. Arthur's legal trap was absolutely perfect. Hope Robert enjoys the money from selling that old truck, because that's all he's getting. I completely agree. They're not the victims here. They tried to commit federal wire fraud against their own son. After that, there's no reason left to call them family. Reddit user Pitago Justice. A little wrong. Yeah, their parents were unfair, but completely cutting them off and making them pay $45,000 in legal fees seems pretty vindictive. They're still your parents. Maybe a smaller settlement would have been more mature. Oh please. They tried to steal millions of dollars through electronic fraud. Vindictive would have been calling the FBI right away. OP showed incredible restraint by handling it peacefully and letting them keep their freedom. Maturity is not letting someone rob you just because you share blood with them. Reddit user Flower Memo. The $15,000 boat story keeps haunting me. Arthur secretly building that for 15 years is the most gangster move I've ever read on this subreddit. Exactly. That boat moment was when the mask finally came off. Everything after that was just an unstoppable reversal of power. Like a car with no brakes speeding toward a cliff. Reddit user Family First or Last. This is exactly why I went no contact with my own parents. The whole golden child thing destroys everything. Proud of Arthur for choosing himself. Same here. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to close the door on people who only open it when they want something from you. In the end, OP didn't destroy the family. The parents did that the day they chose greed over their own son. He just refused to be their victim anymore. If you've ever been the forgotten sibling, drop your story in the comments. If you're new here, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and I'll see you in the next episode, where the drama gets even darker. Stay strong, everyone. Peace out.